Good morning. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here on this rainy day. They say that the rain should finish up by 10 or 11 o'clock, so we should have a beautiful sunny afternoon to enjoy our day. I'm Patricia Aceves, and along with my co-host, Diana Voss, we welcome you to Stony Brook's 7th Annual Teaching and Learning Colloquium. Many of you have joined us for many years, and we're glad you're back. For those of you who have been here for the first time, welcome. And we know that you'll enjoy the day full of learning and networking and hearing inspiring people talk. So without any further ado, I want to introduce our first speaker, Dr. President Samuel L. Stanley, Jr., who is the 5th president of Stony Brook University. And since arriving in 2009, Dr. Stanley has focused on obtaining resources necessary to enable Stony Brook to attain the next level of excellence. Dr. Stanley has been a strong champion of the New York SUNY 2020 legislation, which has helped Stony Brook to hire more than 240 new faculty. He has made fundraising a priority and secured major gifts from the Simons Foundation, as well as overseeing the gift that helped us to complete Fry Hall, our newest leading-edge classroom building that offers innovative teaching and learning spaces, utilizes wireless technologies in new and engaging ways, provides students with collaborative learning areas, opportunities for computerized testing, and video conferencing. In addition to his work on improving undergraduate and graduate education, Dr. Stanley is a highly distinguished biomedical researcher and one of the nation's highest recipients of support from the NIH for his research on enhanced defense against emerging infectious diseases. Dr. Stanley currently serves on the National Security Higher Education Advisory Board and the board of the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. He also serves as chair of the NIH National Science Advisory Board for Biosecurity and is chair of the University's Research Association, Council of Presidents, and most recently began his term on the NCAA Division I Board of Directors. So with great admiration, and we're thrilled to have him, Dr. Stanley.
That's a great introduction. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Patricia, and that was a really good introduction. It's great to be here this morning. It really is, and it's a great opportunity, I think, for me to reflect a little bit on how far we've come just over the past 2 years. I think it was Bob Dylan, right, who said the times are a-changin'. We've been talking a lot at Stony Brook about teaching and learning technology for years, but I'm seeing a lot of action, which is something very impressive, and I see it, as Patricia mentioned, in Fry Hall, which I think is a new addition essentially to the university, but, whoa, sorry about that. Okay, which is a new addition to the university, but a state-of-the-art one, and one I think that really reflects well on our commitment to changing how we do teaching and learning at this institution. We're on a good path, I think, at this point in time. I look out in the audience, I see Wendy, who's made our first fully online course in electrical engineering, something that's unique, I think, across the nation, and certainly unique in SUNY and helping us push in a leadership position there. I see what we're doing with SBOLD, the Online Learning Development Initiative. We've invested $1 million, essentially, to try and look at some of our most important courses, in some cases bottleneck courses, and change how we teach them in ways that will benefit students, but also hopefully benefit faculty as well. Because I think many of these new approaches are more efficient and allow faculty more productive time when they're implemented well. We have a focus now on mobile digital now strategy to enhance technology use for faculty. That's incredibly important. We're going to continue to invest in this. And Cole is leading a very bold initiative to really make seamless transfer actually work. The idea of actually working with our community college partners, NASA Community College and Suffolk County Community College, to work with them to find ways to make sure students there, who are bound hopefully for Stony Brook, are fully prepared, that they can actually participate in Stony Brook courses through technology, involving both faculty at NASA and Suffolk and at Stony Brook, working together to create these kind of courses, but to make sure then they have the kind of shared experiences so when they arrive at Stony Brook, they're ready. they're ready to go to the second level of calculus or the second level of biology. Seamless transfer, something the Chancellor has announced for SUNY, is an incredibly important initiative, but it can't be done well without this kind of activity and action. And I think Stony Brook is taking a lead on this, and I think it's going to be very important. We're going to be competing essentially for SUNY 2020 dollars to get this done, but I'm incredibly excited about that in the future. So we're making key investments. We have an annual funding opportunity called the Teaching and Learning Engaging New Technology Program, the Talent Grants. That's money that's out there, essentially, that you can compete for to help you, your initiatives move forward in this area. And again, it's something I'm very excited about. But I think the one thing I would tell you is that it's not difficult to get engaged in this. And I'm speaking now from personal experience. So I've been teaching while I've been at Stony Brook. You may be surprised to hear that, but I have. Every year I teach one semester, so that may not be the official faculty workload, and I apologize for that, but every year I teach one semester, one course. But it's always been the same, and it's been the same way I taught it for the past 25 years, which is I stood up at a place like this, I had slides, and I talked to the students who sat there. And I said, and now I'm going to tell you about Ebola, and this is what this looks like, and this looks like, and you should know this and this. And then at the end, there were maybe 2 minutes for questions and discussion, and that was the class. And then I evaluated people based on a test that they took to see whether they could essentially regurgitate the points that I'd put forward. So I got ready to teach this course again, the Global Challenge of Infectious Diseases this year, and I was going to teach in the same way. And I met with somebody. I won't say who it was, but I'm not going to exclude Cole as one of the possibilities. But we sat down and talked about the course, and we came up with some ideas for how to do it differently. So I really changed the course completely. And it's a small course. It's 20 students. It's one of the honors courses, so there's things that are probably unique to it that allowed me to take this particular approach. It doesn't mean this approach would work for anyone. But I completely flipped the course around in that I had the students do all of the presentations. So the students taught things like Ebola, tuberculosis, smallpox. They were divided into groups of 4 students, 5 groups of 4 students for us. Each of those groups was assigned a topic. The work I had to do was to find the right questions so they knew which direction to go to as they prepared their lectures, so they didn't get off on tangents that, at least from my perspective, might not have taught them everything I think that they hoped they would learn from this, but they still had a lot of freedom within this construct. And then I said, teach it the way you want to teach it. So it could be PowerPoint, it could be a movie, it could be a skit, I don't care. You just need to address these things. Make sure you address these questions, but then anything else you want to convey is fine. And then we set up a shared site using Stony Brook. It's Stony Brook U. Is that the correct name for it? Thank you, Cole. Stony Brook U. We set up a shared site in Stony Brook U, so I could visualize the work they were doing. So again, I could look at their presentations before they did them, and if they were going in the right direction, that was great. As it turned out with this class, they were always going in the right direction. They were actually outstanding. I don't know if I'd had complete trust that this was going to work well when I started it, but they proved to me absolutely categorically that they could do this. So I could approve their presentations, and then they would present, and then we would blog afterwards about it. And that got students involved. And what I discovered was there were students in class who were reluctant to raise their hand, because we had discussions, of course, in class as well. They were very reluctant to raise their hands. But in the blogs, they were very active, and they would make comments, and they would stir controversy, and they would talk about controversial issues and so on. So it turned out to be a tremendously rewarding experience for me. And I think actually, to some degree, reduced my workload in terms of preparation, and I learned. That was the wonderful thing, too. I sat there, and they brought up points that I didn't know about smallpox, or I didn't know about Ebola, or any of the other things we talked about. So it's one small example, but I think there's real opportunity out there to try and utilize some of these technologies, and I think it's our job to help provide the resources and the support to help you make that possible. And so that's what I think we're going to do. So today you're going to hear a lot of ideas. We have Bryan Alexander, who I think will stimulate a lot of discussion, and I look forward, and I think it's going to be a great session. But I think, I'm going to ask you to think about stepping out of your comfort zone. a little bit. Think about doing something in a different way. I know it seems to have worked pretty well for X number of years, but I think you discovered there can be a lot of fun and reward from doing it in a different way. So that's my advice. Unfortunately, I have to run. I have to be somewhere at 11 in the city, which means I probably should have left 15 minutes ago, but that's okay. But I really hope you have a great conference. Thank you all for your engagement in this. Thank you for your willingness to be involved, but as I said before, think about stepping outside that comfort zone. Think about doing something different, because I think there's tremendous rewards, both for your students potentially, and for you as well. Thanks.
Good morning. That's nice. Yeah. I want to thank President Stanley for those great remarks. I really appreciate the fact that he took the time to do this for us this morning and to engage the community in this conversation. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Bryan Alexander. Bryan is a futurist, researcher, writer, speaker, consultant, and teacher working in the field of how technology transforms education. Bryan completed his English language and literature PhD at the University of Michigan in 1997. With a dissertation on doppelgangers in romantic era fiction and poetry. It's true. It's actually true. Yeah. Bryan taught literature, writing, multimedia, and information technology studies at Centenary College of Louisiana. While there, he pioneered multi-campus interdisciplinary classes, as well as organizing an information literacy initiative. From 2002 to 2014, Bryan worked with the National Institute for Technology and Liberal Education, a nonprofit organization working to help small colleges and universities best integrate digital technologies. While there, he held several roles, including co-director of a regional education and technology center, director of emerging technologies, and senior fellow. Over these years, Bryan helped develop and support the nonprofit, grew peer networks, consulted, and conducted a sustained research agenda. It was during those years that I first met Bryan. Bryan tirelessly travels the country, providing deep insights into most things digital, all things internet culture, and the occasional foray into the depths of remarkably relevant literary references. I challenge you to keep up with Bryan this morning. I've had the pleasure of listening to him speak many times over the last 10 years, and each time I walk away having learned something surprising. Bryan's energy and passion for teaching and learning is infectious, and his insights into the state of higher education are spot on. Please help me in welcoming my friend and colleague, Dr. Bryan Alexander.
Good morning. One of the first tasks of anybody speaking about technology is to break as much of the technology as possible. Can you hear me all right? Good? You're not getting the good rustling of the beard on the microphone noise? Okay. How many of you are on Twitter? Show of hands. Excellent. And how many of you are tweeting right now? It's okay. If you're not, go ahead. Please do. What I'm putting up here, if you don't use Twitter, this is a tool called TweetDeck, which lets you look at selected tweet streams on different topics. And so you can see here, I have two columns for people who are tweeting at me. This isn't egotistical, well, it can be, but it's mostly so I can track people who want to get my attention. And over there, we can see the whole tweet stream for this very day. So you can read through here and see what people are talking about. Who's shady? Not Slim Shady, but this is different. And then there's Patricia, there's Kim. VoiceThread.com is actually here. And there's Nancy. So as we go for the next hour, please leave your thoughts, your comments, your howls of outrage and dismay, your request for clarification, all of that there. And if I didn't ask you to do this, people would probably do it anyway. This is part of the condition of our time. Our face-to-face learning, our face-to-face research and presentation now has built in a second digital layer that's always there. You have to assume it's there. It's a kind of second stage or a back channel. You can do things with it, and we can talk about that later if you like. I just wanted to put this up here so that you can see it in operation already. Now, I'm really glad to be here for a few reasons. One of which is that my wife and I live in Vermont, and we still have some snow on our land right now. We were very pleased to discover grass. A couple of days ago, it was a big challenge. We were excited by that. And the whole landscape dropped about 4 feet because we had this layer of tundra on the land. The other reason is just on a personal note. I was born in New York City, and I lived from age 2 to age 13 in Dix Hills. I haven't been back since the early 1980s, so for me it's a nice trip down memory lane to come back to Long Island. What I'm going to do over the next hour, next 45 minutes, is help you think about the future of education, especially under its impact by technology. I'm going to do this by hitting a few major areas. I have to move fast. There's a lot of ground to cover. There are a lot of topics, a lot of ideas. Some are really complex, some just sound strange, some may be depressing, challenging, or exhilarating. But as we go, hold on to anything that you need to ask about. I want to make sure that we have conversation at the end, more than 2 minutes. And if you don't have questions, as a recovering English professor, I will ask you. Here's the sequence. First, to get at the future of something, a really useful way is to look at trends of the future buried in the present. So we're going to begin by looking at trends that have nothing to do with technology, the contexts within which education moves. Then we're going to take a look at technology by itself, developments in the digital world. Then how they mesh, where education and technology mix. And then explore one possible fusion of all those trends. And then conclude with 4 short stories about possible futures for education. So please put on your science fiction thinking caps. Think about the far future of, say, 2016. And bear in mind one caveat. Humans are terrible at guessing at the future. Is anybody here from political science? What was that study? It was a few years ago where a political scientist looked at opinion makers and political scientists like Bernardo Mesquita looking at the predictions of the future. And they compared it to random guesses. And the random guesses were actually more accurate in predicting. We are very, very bad at this. And one of the reasons is because of the black swan. If you don't know this term, it's from the statistician Nicholas Taleb. A black swan is an event that is extremely unlikely to occur. But when it occurs, it has enormous impact, and afterwards, everyone thinks it was inevitable. And there are a lot of black swans you can look at in history. The September 11th attacks, the 2008 financial crisis, the appearance of every world religion. I mean, all of these come about with extremely low probability, and when they occur, they change everything. So if you think about the future of education, it's possible in the next 5 to 6 years that we will have a black swan that really reboots everything. It could be something as simple as, say, a major cultural development, religious fervor, political collapse, economic boom. It could be something like powerful artificial intelligence that actually works at the commodity level. So I need to put this as a caveat. When we think about the future, you got to watch out for these wild card black swans. Now, to give you a little bit of a bona fide, one of the ways that I do this is by performing a monthly trend analysis. I publish a little report, very, very small, half of its footnotes, and I take a look at trends that have occurred. And what's interesting is because we live in the age of the web and social media, I use those tools to help make this a better report. So I get results, I get information from Twitter, from the blogosphere, from podcasts, from Facebook, from Google+, and then I push all of them right back out and say, okay, here's a story about the University of Alaska cutting programs. Here's a story about a new computing device from the University of Michigan. What do you guys think? It's a kind of way of thinking out loud, a way of almost crowdsourcing the future. And I push this out every month using an old-fashioned technology of email. And if there's a topic that requires more thought, more extensive work, I blog about this and get still more work. So let's dive into some of these trends. To begin with, in education itself, there have been some major, major currents that have been sweeping through it, and some of these are very strange. One of them is that K through 12 has been under pressure to reform itself. Now, how many of you here are in the education department? Well, education, I should say. Are involved in teacher training in the K through 12 level? Okay, so you know that in your whole lifetime, we've had this continuous pressure to reform from nation at risk onward, right? Higher education now is facing similar pressures for accountability, for cost control, and these pressures are coming from all over the political spectrum and from up and down the governmental layers, from the president down to individual towns. We're also seeing rising student debt. Now, the debt specter can be enormously overblown at times. I mean, after all, about 1/3 of students graduate without any debt whatsoever, which is pretty significant. But the 2/3 that do graduate have debt roughly at $30,000. And the total amount of student debt is estimated between $1.1 and $1.2 trillion. This is a lot of money. This is unprecedented in American history, and this scares us in many ways. On top of it, within education, we're taking a look at alternative methods of certification. So beyond the degree, beyond the class, beyond the transcript, we're talking about competency-based learning. Many, many public institutions, especially in the Midwest, are considering ways of granting basically life experience credit for people having passed certain tests. We're also using badges to try to give people more recognition for other work that isn't necessarily recognized by the curriculum. I'll avoid making the joke about, we don't need no sneaking badges, right? But a badge is basically like a merit badge, for Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts, except, but it's digitally based, and you can tie it to something else. So, for example, if I learned Java programming, which I'd love to do again, I can get a badge saying, basically Java 1. And if you looked at that badge and you wonder, okay, well, what's Java? You could click through it to explanation of what it is, but also a source of where I got it from. And I might not be able to get that by taking a university class. That might give me computer science 2, but not necessarily Java. Great question. What's your name? Sarah. We also are watching education become globalized and internationalized in ways that are kind of surprising and not often talked about. One reason is because American higher education really likes to think about American higher education. We think we're kind of cosmopolitan and global if we talk about Canada. But it's really important to think about the global experience because that's where we are. To begin with, more and more international students are coming to the United States, and for reasons which we'll talk about in a minute. That's really beginning to change the demographic makeup of our undergraduate and graduate populations. We're also seeing many other nations and continents building up their higher education system to compete with the United States. We remain the world's leading destination for higher education, but Latin America, Europe, China, the Middle East are growing universities, they're growing faculties like mad. It's basically a global arms race to catch up with the United States. And along the lines of that, we're throwing campuses abroad. I mean, NYU is the most famous, but many, many colleges and universities are opening branch offices, branch campuses across the planet. Now, in the US, one of the reasons for these changes is some powerful currents that are happening that we really need to have on the table before we discuss anything. One of them is that we are suffering from a strange demographic shift. The proportion of Americans who are under 20 is shrinking. And without immigration, the total number of K through 12 under 20 people would actually be going downhill. This has never happened in American history before. This is unprecedented and very, very strange. This has already had a huge tidal effect on K through 12 across the United States. It's beginning to surge into the traditional undergraduate population, kids 18 to 22. Demographics have the advantage of being very predictable. They don't change rapidly unless something really, really horrendous happens. So you can count on that. On top of this, graduates in their 20s are putting off having children, mostly for economic reasons. So the next generation is going to be even smaller. You really have to think of the opposite of a baby boom. We're now living through a baby bust of fewer and fewer kids. That has enormous implications for all of education, not to mention the economy or our culture. This is especially pronounced in the upper Midwest and, as you know, in the Northeast. But very, very few states are actually seeing their under 20 population grow. We're also seeing the demographics change in terms of our racial mix, where we're seeing the proportion of Americans who are white getting smaller and smaller, while the proportion who are Hispanic and Asian growing more and more. We're also seeing the proportion of Americans who are seniors bulging out. If you take a look at this kind of population chart for most populations across the world and in history, you'll see it looks like a pyramid. The bottom layer is kids age 0 to 4, the next layer 5 to 9, the next layer 10 to 14, and so on. So most societies have a lot of kids, a lot of teenagers, a little fewer people in their 20s, fewer in their 30s, and so on. But what we're experiencing now is something like instead of a pyramid, we have a refrigerator or a rectangle where we're basically having as many seniors as we have kids. That's unusual. The only society in the world that has this right now is Japan. And Japan is going nuts trying to figure out how to keep going. So this is a key part of our understanding. One side note for this, more than a few campus presidents and me have been talking about having universities and colleges recruit seniors as students. We haven't been doing this very much. That's a trend you might want to watch out for. Now, that racial transformation, here is one quick chart, a way of thinking about it. If you break down American demographics by age, you can see that if you go back to the World War II generation, three-quarters of the population was white. For boomers, 72%. Millennials, just more than half. So this is a nice representation of where we're changing. Also, we're seeing changes in enrollment. See, we haven't got the technology yet because all of these forces are so powerful. Here's one bit of enrollment. Do you guys use the term swirling to describe students moving between campuses? Yeah, it's an ugly term. I really don't like it. But this is referring, we have this old idea that an 18-year-old goes to college, they stay there for 4 years, and they graduate. I mean, that's actually a really rare experience right now. And one of the reasons that's an unusual experience is because we have many, many students who move between institutions. This is one chart just showing how many people who graduated from a 4-year institution attended a 2-year institution along the way. And as you can see, it's about half. And if you take a look at this geographically, it's interesting to take a look. Here in the Northeast, not so much. The South and the West and the High Plains West, very, very plentiful. But this is a really different experience. When your president was talking about having credit transfer, this is one of the reasons why that's so important. The other thing to talk about, and we can spend the whole day talking about this, is rising economic inequality. There are many, many charts that describe this. There are many ways of talking about it. But one of them is the wealthier you are in the United States, the more likely you are to go to college and especially to complete an undergraduate education. You can find plenty of charts like this. This takes a look at the American population broken down economically. And you can see the bottom three-fourths of the economic distribution in the United States, maybe a third of us go to college and graduate. But if you're in the top, you're extremely likely to go to school and graduate. So we're seeing this interesting break. Back in the 1960s and 70s, this wasn't very pronounced, but we're now seeing this widen in higher education. We're really facing the possibility that a good chunk of higher education is going to be reserved for the wealthy. I mention that as a description. That's something we need to think about as we prepare our work. Moreover, the number of students who are enrolled in higher education grew through the 80s, boomed in the 90s, took off like mad in the first decade of the 21st century, and then stopped. The past 3 or 4 years, we've actually seen the total number of students enrolled in higher education go down a little bit. People are arguing about what this means. Is this a pause? Is it due to the economic recovery, so-called? It's a really good question. But this is an interesting problem. Have we reached peak higher education? I'll come back to that later. Now, for those of you who are teaching, I think this is pretty obvious, but it's worth stating, and this is not well known outside of education. The majority of faculty teaching in the United States are part-time without tenure. This has been true since roughly 2006, and it continues to grow. I cannot detect any countervailing motion for this. There is no appetite anywhere in the United States for a major strategic return to increasing tenure. It may be that in 10 years, tenure is a vanishing ghost. And maybe that goes down to 5% of the population. But this has enormous implications for how we teach. And when it comes to using technology, this changes how we use technology. A recent Ithaca S&R study, taking a look at public flagship institutions, found that overwhelmingly, adjuncts were more likely to use technology in innovative ways in teaching than were tenure-track professors. If that's right, think about what that means for how you support teaching and learning on campus. If it's not right, well, these are the kind of debates we have to have. Moreover, when we prepare students to go out into life as a biochemist or as a manager or as a pilot or as a nurse, we have to think about their labor experience. And this has changed drastically. I love watching Mad Men, in part because of this great picture of a vanished time. And one thing that has vanished is the sense of getting a job and working for an employer for your career, and then you retire. That is now vanishing. What we have is what some call the gig economy, where people work multiple jobs, multiple careers, sometimes simultaneously. That's a really unusual way of thinking about work for American culture. I mean, that tells us that we have to prepare students for multiple careers. We haven't really done that very well in higher education. On top of it, our economy, as you know, is shifting away from manufacturing economy to a service economy. So the skills we're training students for really have to change as a result. Now, on top of this, anybody here in computer science or robotics? Excellent. Well, you guys are, meanwhile, changing the entire planet by boosting artificial intelligence and robotics. Automation continues to develop and continues to grow. There's a fascinating book by a pair of MIT economists who are looking at automation. And they wrote a few years ago that automation was likely to take off, that we should expect to see automated checkouts in grocery lines, automated checkouts at libraries, but there's a limit. Automation can't do everything. After all, they wrote, we won't see self-driving cars anytime soon. Their next book, which came out last year, began with them saying, "I'm sorry about that. We were too conservative." That's interesting. I mean, there's all kinds of issues with automation right now, but many economists, many politicians, and policymakers are wondering, are we going to face a major dislocation in the economy? Are we going to face major unemployment as a result? Or do we have to rethink what we do as workers? Do we have to not just think about ourselves as good workers, good at our jobs, but do we have to think about ourselves as not machines? Do we have to emphasize the things that we do that machines are lousy at? Creativity, for example. I mean, this is a huge transformation in how we think about teaching and learning. Moving on. I mentioned income inequality. You've probably all seen charts like this. Just really, really quickly to recap. People call this sometimes the Great Gatsby chart or the Downton Abbey chart. Go back a century, 1900, 1910. The United States was a pretty unequal place. You had a few wealthy people, small middle class, large lower class. As the 20th century staggered along, by the middle of the 20th century, all of that compressed. Economic inequality dropped for all kinds of reasons. World War I and World War II blew up a lot of wealth. The Great Depression vitiated a lot of wealth. But the middle of the 20th century was the least unequal time in American history. Starting roughly 1980, that reversed, and inequality began to take off. And as you can see from the right edge of the chart, it just continues to soar. If you compare the right edge of this chart with the left edge of this chart, this is why we talk about it as the Great Gatsby curve, or by the Downton Abbey curve. We seem to be heading towards that direction of income inequality. I was meeting with the president of a major state university in the upper Midwest, and I asked him, up until this year, what did you train your students to become? Immediately he said, good middle management. That was just the mainline goal that he experienced. Lots of first-generation college students who would normally be an assembly line worker go on to become middle management. Okay. After discussing this trend, I said, now what are you going to train them to do? And the president told me, I have no idea. Notice that the middle class drops out of this picture. Again, if higher education helped build the middle class in the United States, now what are we doing? Moving on. It's important when you talk about the future professionally to admit terrible mistakes you've made. Most people don't do this because it can become extremely embarrassing. For example, in 1999, I was at a conference of Gothic literature scholars in Transylvania, and we were talking about the future of scary stories. And we concluded that vampires were so over, that no one would ever talk about vampires anymore. We thought the next monster would be ghost stories, right? Ghosts are great, but, so sometimes you blow it, right? So one thing I thought that would happen starting in 2008, was that because of the recession, I thought that institutions would collaborate a lot more, that we would see campuses sharing resources back and forth for economic reasons. Hasn't happened. We would rather outsource to a third-party commercial provider in another country than work with our deadly enemies, fellow campuses. SUNY systemness is a pretty rare exception, and the difficulties you've seen in implementing that give you a hint as to why. Moreover, the past few years, there have been a lot of stories about senior administrators, presidents, deans, being overcompensated. that they're paid way too much. And you've probably heard stories from NYU, from Columbia, from Brandeis, and there's a lot of movement. At my alma mater, the University of Michigan, a group of faculty published a study of just how much money people were getting paid and identified bonuses being paid to senior administrators. The University of Michigan spokesperson said, those weren't bonuses. That was extra compensation for extra work done. I thought, that's a bonus, right? He said, no, it's very different. Well, I thought there'd be a lot of outrage. There is. Nothing has happened. We continue that rate of compensation. I also suspected, when I speak to baby boomers, they say, well, we should talk about generational strife. Kids these days should rise up. If you're 18 years old, you're facing a pretty grim future. If you're a 30-year-old academic, ditto. There should be war in the streets. Don't trust anyone over 30. Hasn't happened. Teaching a generation about multiculturalism and tolerance has really paid off. You guys are safe. I also suspected that we would have a backlash against college athletics. The year of the Sandusky trial, for example. The president of my former alma mater, the University of Michigan, which you may know has a football team, that president said, college sports is a beast that must be tamed. Well, as you can tell from this chart, we don't believe it. No matter how bad our economy gets, no matter how many profs we turn into adjuncts, no matter how big student debt grows, we want our football and basketball. It makes zero economic sense for roughly 96% of campuses. Why we do it, it's worth talking about. All of that is context. Let's talk about technology. Charts like this, images like this are a dime a dozen. You can find plenty of them. If you can't make out what it says in the chip, 2005, that chip had 128 meg. That chip last year had 128 gig. Technology advances quickly. It's a cliche, but it's so worth noticing. You've probably heard stories that your phone has more computing power than the entire Apollo space program. Again and again, technology zips along. We don't have enough time to cover a lot, so let me hit some of the major movements and then hit some of the high points. And if there's something that we miss, hold on to it, save it for the end, because we need to hear it. First, to begin with, we're shifting our way we do digital work into vertical stacks. So if you have your iPhone, it plays very nicely with your iPad and with your Mac desktop or laptop. It works really well with the iTunes Store. It lets you buy things in the iLife suite. And nothing can get into that isn't supposed to. It's very, very nice and tidy. You can stay in there. If you have an Amazon Kindle, you can buy your Kindle books, and no other device can play them unless they run the Kindle app and they stay in that little store. If you have Google, your Google Android phone plays well with Google Apps. It plays well with the Chrome notebook. It plays well with all the things that Google does. If you have Microsoft phone, nobody does. Good phone anyway, but if you have the Xbox and the Microsoft Windows operating system, it plays well together. Stack after stack after stack. That's how the companies really want to organize things. Facebook is now going to start hosting content from publishers, including journalists. Keep everything in the Facebook stack. Meanwhile, the way humans actually use this stuff is not so stacked. We prefer horizontal networks. So you've got your iPhone and your Chromebook to check out Facebook when you're not reading an Amazon Kindle book. We like messing this around. This is one of the reasons why Cole has no hair, is because this is driving IT departments totally insane. It also means that companies are going to fight you in doing this. They're going to incentivize you to stay in that vertical stack all the time. That's a battle that goes on back and forth. Meanwhile, in the 1990s, I hung out with a group of people called cypherpunks. These were people who thought that digital cryptography was a big deal, and they were also really afraid that surveillance by the government was becoming a big thing. And I used to speak to my English colleagues. Anybody here from English? All right. What part of English was yours? Excellent, excellent. So you can imagine how this went over with English departments in the 1990s. Crypto, what? The NSA? Isn't that good people? So when the Snowden revelations came out, I got to have the wonderful told you so moment. But also, a lot of us thought the top will blow off, that Americans will be in the streets, right? Because this is astonishing that our government's spying on us. And Americans have said, all right, that's okay. Zero political reaction, zero political traction. Some Americans have restarted their passwords. That's about it. That's a huge transformation. We're okay with this now. And every so often people get really upset. So you'll have an Apple user who will say, I can't stand Google Glass. It's spying on me. I will take video of it with my iPhone and prove that privacy should be protected. It's lots of dumb stuff like that. But really, we're okay with that. Moreover, we are digitizing stuff like mad. We've been doing that since the 70s, but it's worth noting that we keep migrating stuff from the analog to the digital world. And now, is anybody here from the library world at all? I have to, if you don't mind, I have to ventriloquize a terrible pain that you suffer. I hope you don't mind. Librarians, for centuries, have held on to physical records of human civilization. It's been one of their glories to be able to render access to those and to protect them over time. But what's happening now is that we are increasingly not using digital storage in a tangible way, thumb drives, hard drives, DVDs. We're preferring to stream music, stream movies, not actually own it. So libraries now have this weird position where they're not owning stuff. They're owning a license for a period of time. And that can drive some librarians bonkers, because that's a very awkward role and a very invisible one. But meanwhile, the rest of us are loving the fact that we can stream movies from Amazon or from Netflix, get music from Spotify, Rhapsody, or Pandora. That's a huge part of digitization. Here are a few other parts. Digital video, we love to pieces. We love consuming digital video. We love making digital video. Cole, how big is Netflix on campus? Like, roughly how much bandwidth does that take up now? Half? A lot. Yeah. And we love it. And we love making video. If you go through YouTube, people love uploading anything that they can make. Anything. I went out, took a video clip of a stream for 10 seconds and put it up there. I thought it was beautiful. I know that's a narcotically dull thing for other people, but I did this, right? It's there. We also love video conferencing. Video conferencing is not very good quality, but we still use it more and more. Digital video is a huge part of us. Cloud computing used to be a big deal. It was shocking and new, and then we moved there. So what's happening now is that cloud providers are battling with each other. IBM is desperately trying to kill Amazon. Microsoft is trying to stay alive. Google's trying to meanwhile take over the whole world of it. I mentioned automation, AI. Augmented reality is one more thing that's swooping in. If you haven't used augmented reality, you may have not known it. Augmented reality refers to taking digital content and tying it to a physical location. So that when you're driving with a GPS unit, it says turn left. No, I meant left. It gives you a map that tells you where you are. If you use Yelp to find things. A more powerful form of augmented reality actually uses your camera, so that when you point your phone at something, it layers on digital content based on what you're looking at. So if you're in Wimbledon in Britain, for example, you can download an app that will show you what's in the town of Wimbledon as you look at it. So this way is a bathroom, this way is a store, that kind of thing. Augmented reality continues to grow. That's IBM versus Amazon versus Microsoft. Devices. We keep churning these out like mad. Google has a new toy they've promised for the summer, which is a computer in the shape of a USB drive. Stick it into a monitor, you have a computer ready to go. There are tools like, this is my Fitbit. It's actually called an Up. This tracks my sleep and my footsteps. We have a huge battle going on globally between Android and iOS operating systems. We have wearable computing. Again, not to grind this into Stony Brook any further, but my alma mater, the University of Michigan, just launched a computer that is smaller than a grain of rice. It's programmable by light. We've also turned this into the Internet of Things, where we take all these devices and network them like mad. So in theory, you should be able to check the status of your tires on your car or the temperature of your fridge from your phone as you go. I read a really funny science fiction story where someone's car twittered to them as they went. That's actually pretty easy to accomplish. All these things here are simply happening at top speed. Smartphones, okay, quick religious poll here. How many of you have an iPhone? How many of you have an Android phone? How many of you have a BlackBerry? Just look at that, everybody. See how time changes? Anybody have a Microsoft phone? They're really good phones. Okay. Anybody have a feature phone, a dumb phone? Oh, come on, you should, very good. You should. These are good phones. That's the majority of the world uses feature phones, right? But smartphones are obviously enormous. And in the US, as you can see, finally the majority of Americans own a smartphone. Curiously, blacks and Latinos are more likely to own smartphones than whites are. And you can imagine all kinds of implications from that and from this ownership. One is, if you look at a web page, web pages now tend to be simpler to look at. One column instead of three. One big fat picture at the top instead of a little one. The reason isn't because they think you're stupid. I mean, that's what CNN.com thinks. The reason is because they think you're likely to look at that screen on a small screen. And simplicity is what works for a small screen like this. So if you're looking at something through your laptop or through your desktop, you are a second-class audience member. They're designing for mobile first. There are other implications of this. The PCs are getting crowded out by their devices. The mouse and keyboard are no longer the major way we interact with technology. We see 3D printing taking off like mad. We thought that 3D TV would go, it didn't. Social media continues to be enormous. In fact, right now, Pew had a study which showed that by economic class, the wealthier you are, the less likely you were to use Facebook. The poorer you were, the more likely you were to use Facebook. The wealthy tend to prefer Snapchat right now. But if you can see from this chart here, this chart shows a couple of things. One is commerce. We love buying through social media. So you can see here on the left, Pinterest is this huge shopping engine. But also we like shopping through Facebook. That is, we find ads, we find coupons, or we buy something and we share it through these platforms. We also love getting media through social media. We like finding about TV shows, movies, and especially news. This drives journalists totally crazy right now. And 3D printing, meanwhile, we could revolutionize how we do manufacturing, where we're able to print all kinds of devices. I was at Brandeis, where they're in the 9th generation, I think, of printing artificial hands for people. They have many, many different ways of doing this. We can print building pieces, we can print clothing, we can print internal organs for surgery. In the space station, they've been printing in zero-G. I mean, it's possible that we are at a small manufacturing revolution about to happen. I got to keep moving on. I mentioned streaming and physical media beginning to decline. There are a lot of charts like this which show that we're moving away from DVDs. There are a few others, but I want to cut to education, because education is the key thing. And how technology and education are working together is pretty complex. One is the blended classroom. We've been seeing more and more of that. Today, there are some sessions from medical and allied health fields, which I'm looking forward to hearing about this. In fact, my wife, who is sitting there in the front, who is hoping I wouldn't point her out to you guys, has a flipped classroom for emergency services, where she records audio lectures as podcasts and reserves a class space for hands-on and discussion. The flipped classroom or blended learning is beginning to grow further and further across the U.S. We're continually worried about 18-year-olds, that there is some kind of generation of brooding hackers who no longer remember the physical world. It's easy to overstate that, but again and again, we find that newer technologies tend to lodge in the teenage world. Distance learning, we don't call it that anymore, but it's continuing to grow. And we're approaching the point where we're going to see distance learning as basically seen as equal to the baseline of face-to-face education. And meanwhile, we love using digital gaming in education in a few different ways. We're seeing entrepreneurship in education, where people are trying to make money in schools. Crazy idea, but it's there. Big data, data analytics are continuing to develop. And while this is happening, hackers from around the world, especially China, are constantly bombarding your campuses with all kinds of entertaining viruses and threats. There are a ton of other features we can mention. Let me just highlight a couple. The maker movement continues to grow across the United States. That's a really fascinating pedagogical space where learners of all ages get together to work on stuff. They build things like plastics or wood or cloth or macrame. They don't have a master teacher. They teach each other. It tends to be non-digital, although they use YouTube videos to learn. This has entered into academia in many, many places. I've seen several libraries creating maker spaces, including public libraries. The digital humanities. Humanists, my field, have finally realized that computers are a thing. Sorry, humanities. And they are using digital technology to further humanities inquiries. We're seeing this especially in history and politics, as well as in literature. One more point, social media for teaching. I was so excited to hear your president not only talk about teaching a class, but talk about using blogs to enhance student learning. So while we have social media conquering the world, more and more times we have people in academia using it as well. MOOCs are enormously interesting, and they haven't died. They are very large on the global stage. Most MOOC consumers are not in the United States. There are all kinds of interesting things going on with MOOCs. One of them is we know how to give credit for MOOCs, we just don't do it. There's a big split in STEM versus the humanities, where the MOOCs tend to be in the STEM fields. We don't know how to sustain MOOCs. We have no idea. They don't make money. They lose money. So we're trying to figure out how to make them sustainable. And we're seeing them spread across campuses. We're seeing community colleges and liberal arts colleges offer MOOCs. Scholarship. Oh, I don't have time to go into this in great detail. Here's a key thing. Imagine 4 years from now, imagine all the big scholarly publishers cease to exist. This is the nightmare that is facing Thomson Reuters and Elsevier right now. Open access scholarly publication is terrifying these guys. They feel they are facing existential threat because there is no technological barrier to doing peer-reviewed, free, high-quality scholarship. So we're having an enormous battle back and forth. And the battle is fought in the halls of tenure. The battle is fought in Congress. The battle is fought between publishers. It's a fascinating war to see. Now, a ton of trends, a whole bunch of them. Let me try wrapping them together for you. Here's one. What if we assume, for the sake of argument, that we have anxieties about the cost of higher education? And we all know that published tuition is not what most people pay. They pay the net price, but it has been rising. It's very expensive in most places. We also know there's anxiety about the results. Academically Adrift dealt academia a huge blow. Very, very serious book. Not a flimsy one, but one backed up by lots of sociological evidence. We're not in good odor, as they say, in the rest of the country. We also know that students are terrified about debt. Maybe over much, but still, it's a major force. And about employment. We also know that some grad schools are facing really serious problems. Let me just ask your indulgence for a moment, if you could just try to feel a grain of sympathy for lawyers. I know it's hard. Law schools are being slaughtered across the United States. The number of students enrolling has been taking a nosedive for the past 6 years. The number of students taking the LSAT has been plunging. The number of lawyers graduating and getting jobs has been dropping like mad. We're seeing law schools offer tenure buyouts and retirement packages to people as young as 50 right now. There are talks about lots of law schools that are looking to merge or just simply shut down. There's a huge crisis going on. I know it's hard to feel sympathy for lawyers in general. Every lawyer I know collects very violent law jokes, but law is a major business. It's a major field for students to graduate into, and it's really being pushed down. On top of this, we used to be able to count on a kind of political kabuki of the two parties where Republicans would complain about higher education, Democrats would defend it. That stopped around 2008. And now Democrats are arguably louder in trying to fix higher education than Republicans are. Democrats like, for example, the President of the United States, the head of the Department of Education, your governor of New York, Rahm Emanuel in Chicago. So we're facing bipartisan political pressure. Put all these trends together, and higher education is in a vice. Moreover, what college graduates get for their money is looking harder and harder. This chart takes a look at college graduates and how much they make compared to college graduates in 1980. And you can see you're okay. People in Maine and North Carolina are all right. But most of the country, college graduates today are making less than they did in 1980. This does not induce an 18-year-old to want to come here and get $30,000 in debt. This terrifies them. This terrifies their parents. Worse, this terrifies legislators. So, maybe we're in a bubble. Maybe we're going to see tuition start to drop. Maybe we'll see the amount of students coming into education begin to go down a bit. Maybe we've had peak higher education. Maybe not. Maybe not. We know that private institutions have endowments that have been coming back. You guys have an endowment of what? 150 million or so? I mean, it's not private school level, but endowments have been coming back since Wall Street recovered. And on top of that, the amount of debt sounds scary, but a $30,000 debt is not a home note. It's more like a car note. And beyond that, there's this. One caveat about this chart, the gender gap here is appalling, yes. But what this chart demonstrates is what economists call the college premium. If you go to university, graduate, how much money you make in your lifetime compared to if you didn't go to university. And that bonus is enormous. We're looking between $370,000 and $590,000 for your lifetime. $30,000 debt, great deal. We don't know if this data still holds out. But if it does, going to university is still a great deal. So maybe we don't have a bubble. Now, what can you do with these trends? Well, the simple, easy thing to do, and I recommend doing this yourself whenever you know something in the news, is to simply take one forward, just extend it in time. What happens if this goes on further? And so I just picked right now for this slide all the trends that seem kind of non-controversial, the trends that seem baked in, the trends that seem likely to occur. So let's just imagine your campus in 5 or 10 years. They're transnational. You set foot at a campus and you hear languages being spoken from around the world, you hear enormous ethnic variety and diversity, huge national diversity. The average age of a student on that campus is 40. The 18-year-old is as much an outlier as a 70-year-old. Faculty tend to be paid by the hour. If you think I'm exaggerating, the University of Warwick in Britain has just established this right now. So tenure, not quite the point. We also see a huge gap between the wealthiest schools and everybody else. I call this Hogwarts versus the community colleges. But if you take a look at, say, Stanford or MIT or Harvard, they're not really concerned right now. They're doing all right. The joke about Harvard, if you've heard this, is that it's a hedge fund that owns the university. But meanwhile, where most students go has less and less money. And let's assume, on the technology side, that the idea of a laptop seems kind of dinosaur-like. That 10 years from now, we have multiple little bits of computing that we speak with, that we interact with, that just kind of spread throughout our space and our body. That we are massively surveyed, partly for ourselves, where we know what we've eaten, we know where we've been, we know what our heart rate is, we know how much we've slept, we know who we've talked to, because we use that information for our own health benefits. And of course, the NSA knows all of this as well, and so does Apple. We also are very creative, because we know that with the digital world, the more digital content thrown at us, the more we tend to throw back. The more movies we make, the more games we make, the more social media we generate. And students make stuff. That's not how we built higher education, but that's how it works. This is one campus. You could imagine. It seems kind of likely. But the opposite of trends is stories. Some people think the opposite of data is narrative. So let me tell you 4 little quick stories based on a few of these trends, and then we'll stop. So I just want to take a few of these trends and emphasize them, make them major developments, and build the future around them. So for the next few minutes, how much time do I have left? Thank you, Joe. That's a very nice call. For the next few minutes, I want you to think about yourself in these futures. I want you to imagine yourself 10 years from now in the library, teaching creative writing, being a student, being a parent, being an administrator, maybe being retired, but just imagine yourself in this world. Each of these has a cute title, which I hope will stick in your brain. So the first one is the fall of the silos. I want you to imagine a world where open has won. And I don't mean that as a celebration. Open content in this world is the name of the game, where you can get anything totally available, where teaching occurs in the open and research, where your classes occur online that anybody else can peek into, where we use open notebook teaching, where as you research in the lab, you make the materials available for the whole world to see. Scholarship is freely available for the whole planet to consume, and open source software has conquered the world. Society changes partly as a result and partly to make this happen. One is that we share. I don't mean this in the California hippie sense. I mean, we just love giving stuff out. You remember back in the day? Okay, let me date. Anyone see this picture where there's a cassette tape and a pencil? They say, if you know what these two mean together, you're of a certain age, right? But when we did that, that's a great thing I loved about the movie Rise of the Guardians, right? Guardians of the Galaxy, which had those great tapes, right? But we used to make mixtapes. We would do that. We would make them as gifts. We love sharing stuff, or as copyright lawyers call it, massive copyright infringement. We love sharing stuff, and we'll do more of it. So here, in this future, because everything is open, we love sharing. We constantly give away things. We also have that gig economy, where we like switching back and forth. We're not very loyal to employers. Why should we be? And what do they give us? Just a gig, right? There are some positive things here. There are some nice features about this world. One is that global conversations occur all over the place because they're not walled in. They're not segmented. They're not firewalled. The great firewall of China is no more. Another is that there's no filter bubble. That is, you can get access to more stuff. Your perceptions are not conditioned by a search engine. There's more access. You can just find more things. You can find more movies, more music, more stories, more teachers, more friends, more pictures of cats. And there's more information. You can just get more information about anything from tax records to soil records to sexuality. And there's tons of creativity. Because like I said, people tend to respond to stuff by generating more stuff. So perhaps we have new methods of storytelling. We have people who are more enabled to share their voices. Campuses have some good stuff too. The price of information, as our librarian friend here will be happy to know, will drop. Journals, books cost less. That's a nice thing. Textbooks are cheaper. Faculty are more creative. I don't mean that as a criticism of our current professoriate. I just mean that they have to respond to so much more stuff. And they're more flexible because there's so much more open content to worry about. IT departments are the same way. They have a lot more to respond to. And academic content is now available for anybody. A poor farmer, a kid somewhere in Mongolia. Anybody can take a look at a journal article or a class discussion or a monograph. I said this wasn't always happy. So some industries collapse. Imagine that New York goes into a recession because, among other things, the entertainment industry goes into recession because we don't want to pay for Hollywood because we prefer to share. We don't want to pay for Simon & Schuster because we have all these other books that we can read. And we don't want to pay for scholarly content because we have open access content. So the whole industry is snuffed right out. Authorship is hard to pin down. See, the reason for this is unless you have a detailed control mechanism like copyright, who creates a piece of content is hard to identify because that content can drift around somewhere else. Have you ever had the experience of being plagiarized? Anybody? I mean, that's often a scary thing. But you can have your digital content drift somewhere else. I take photos and they appear on someone's poster. Because I'm this kind of, hippie, I don't mind. But it makes it hard to figure out who took that photo, who wrote this paragraph, who made this movie. Authorship becomes kind of mysterious. And on top of that, some technology doesn't work very well. Open source is a powerful thing, but it hasn't worked very well for video conferencing, for example. It hasn't gone very far in gaming. Some things cost more because you have to pay for protection. There's more malware, a lot more privacy. A lot more piracy, a lot less privacy. And scholarship declines in quality because anything can be published. Right? If you're in a campus, campuses change in the open world like mad once the silos go down. The challenges are enormous, right, for technology support. Outsourcing and offshoring really picks up. People don't use the learning management system anymore. They don't use Blackboard. Students make their own personal learning environment, or PLE. Faculty crowdsource work like mad. We're already seeing this now in 2015, where we have astronomers putting out information for people to help with citizen astronomers. But more and more often, faculty will push stuff out there for people to help with. And information literacy is central to the undergraduate curriculum because how else can you survive in the digital world? You have to have that skill to figure out what's useful and what's not. Now, you might recognize this banner, you might not, but I'm sure you've been sent the Beloit College Mindset List. It comes out every August. Beloit's English department, so you know they're crazy, sends this out. It's a list of what 18-year-olds know in their world. So this isn't a critical thing. It's what they've experienced having been born in, say, 1998, and what they don't know. It's a fun list, so I borrowed it. Imagine an 18-year-old in this world. They've grown up in it. So for them, the internet has always been open. It's always meant open. Silos, walled gardens, that's historical. The web has never been a way to make money. And their online identities have always been playful. They have lots of pseudonyms. They have lots of false masks they put on. That's one scenario. One scenario, the fall of the silos. Put it here. Silo scenario 2, peak higher education. I'd like you to imagine 10 years from now, 2025, and we look back at 2011 as the year when everything changed. That's the year when enrollment started going down and higher education started to shrink. Because of demographics, having fewer and fewer kids, being less and less able to compete for a global audience, because of accelerated prices and costs that universities simply can't get rid of, because of public funding continuing to go down, and alternatives, lots and lots of online learning available for cheap. In this world, we have fewer campuses, and they are less crowded. Some campuses have closed, like Sweetbriar. Some just sold off chunks of land and buildings. We have a very international student body, because it's the only way we can keep the doors open. We have lots of low-cost programs, $10,000 BAs. We have lots of remedial programs, because we have to really get every student in that we possibly can. And that means a lot of students who aren't prepared for college. And college is basically seen as job training in this world. The maker movement is enormous. People go there to pick up all kinds of skills. There's lots of DIY learning, lots of unschooling. An 18-year-old in this world, a very different kid than the one we just talked about. And for them, vocational classes are huge in K-12 because they've been taking them for training for jobs. Apprenticeships are often how they go on to careers. And colleges for them have always been this cosmic, transnational, multicultural place. Let me put that scenario aside. Let me give you a third scenario. Call this one Tutor Me Siri. And if the computer scientists here will bear with me for a moment, let's just imagine in 10 years we have decent artificial intelligence. I don't mean it can replace the human mind. I mean artificial intelligence good enough to tutor people to a certain degree in certain fields. And that it's available at the commodity level. You can download a Teach Me French app, or at the enterprise level. So Cole can run this for your university. Imagine that these are available, and they're pretty good. Again, not perfect, but pretty good. It happened because we've been working on this for a long time. We've been working very, very hard on artificial intelligence. We've also been working on human-computer interaction. So one of the advances of Siri was its ability to actually respond to us in a pretty essential way. We've also been working on learning science, where we know more about how the brain actually changes when we learn something, which lets us in turn develop better ways of teaching. We have commercial projects, we have governmental projects, we have academic projects. Has anyone here looked at the Carnegie Mellon Open Learning Initiative? Oh, which is amazing. What department are you in?
DLT.
Very good. Wise man. If you haven't seen this yet, I really, really recommend this. You can just go in there, just go to Online Learning Initiative. And it's a series of tutorials in a series of mostly science projects, right? Stoichiometry, some basic chemistry. And it's beautifully done. They're the best tutorials on the web, bar none. Let's just take this 10 years from now. Let's assume that we accelerate all that development. And all these tools have the open web to draw upon. One of the reasons why Watson is so powerful is because there's so much stuff for Watson to chew on and play with. Higher education changes if we have a Siri for Biology 101. One part is that we're better at doing this for quantitatively intensive subjects than for qualitatively intensive subjects. So we're better at doing this for math and for computer science than we are for history or for philosophy. So let's just assume that we have this kind of divide. Also, computer science and robotics departments will be huge at this point because of the demand for it, because this is so powerful a tool. We should also expect arguments over scholarship. I don't know if you've been watching this, but there have been some really powerful experiments in using artificial intelligence to write news articles in sports and finance, and they're pretty good now. So we've also trained Watson to look at medical journals and medical research and look for gaps that we haven't yet addressed. Press fast forward. Imagine this 10 years from now when we have AI-generated scholarship that we have to fight over. Is it legitimate? Is it viable? Is it putting us out of a job? Speaking of which, higher education also changes because we have fewer and fewer full-time faculty because we can replace them with good tutors. Face-to-face undergraduate enrollment begins to drop because you can get so much of that education from your smartphone. And graduate enrollments drop because people are terrified about getting a PhD and not being able to get a job. Do you all know the Math Emporium from Virginia Tech? It's an interesting dynamic where they had this problem. Virginia Tech, right? Should be good at math. And they had a lot of kids who are failing math. Very embarrassing. So what they did was they took up this huge building. It was a department store. Filled it with Macs. It was the world's second biggest Mac lab. Crammed all the Macs with math tutorials and unleashed the students on it. Around the edges of this space are tutors who can drop in if people need help. And it's boosted math scores like mad. Well, instead of math, we can have this for anything. Instead of full-time tenured faculty, we can have TAs and adjuncts and even very bright seniors. If you're a kid in this world, what's it like? Wow. You had lots of study halls in high school because they were designed so you could sit down with your tutor. You also love some of your tutors. And if you think that's crazy, think about how many people name their cars. No one here, right? Think how close we can be to our pets, or better yet, to a piece of technology that we put on our body and carry around with us all the time. Also, kids these days, they value humans for their unique style and eccentricity because they're so different from Cortana. Last scenario. Last possible future. Futurists are supposed to have one positive scenario, and this is my positive one. I want you to imagine being 2025, and we look back over the past 30 years, and this is a hard thing to do, to look back over the past that hasn't happened yet. Science fiction is a really good way to survive the 21st century. We look back over the past 25 years and realize that we have lived through a renaissance. We didn't know it at the time. We didn't call it that. It wasn't always good, but it really was. We have lived through a boom time in human creativity, through storytelling. We have had, for the first time in 150 years, everyone being a storyteller, where every human with access to technology can make a story in whatever medium they want. We have millions and millions of voices expressing themselves and telling narratives for the first time. We see it through social media. In fact, this document here is usually considered one of the great historical documents. I don't know if you've seen this, by the way. This is the White House Tumblr. And by the way, I just can't get enough of saying the White House Tumblr. This is, if you don't know Tumblr, it's a blogging tool, and the average age of a user is roughly 12. It's a wonderful tool. I recommend checking it out. But here, this is from 2012. This is from the election that Barack Obama won. And listen to this line in it. We'd like this Tumblr to be a huge collaborative storytelling effort, a place for people across the country to share what's going on in our respective corners of it. So you have the White House calling on everybody, not Silicon Valley kids, but everybody, to do digital storytelling. This is a foundational document. 2025, we look back and go, oh yeah, that was a milestone. We know that people use photos. They use multimedia to tell heart-wrenching stories. We know that we use even small tools like Twitter to real-time tweet stories like the fall of the Titanic. Gaming in 2025 is the world's biggest culture industry. That's where we find role models, that's where we find stories. Everybody plays games, all ages, all genders, all races. It's extremely diverse. There are satirical games, there are learning games, there are political games. We use them in class all the time to teach with. We study games in 2025, like we study film in 2015. It's a major part of human creativity and history. We archive them in libraries. We use game technologies to change how people behave in everyday life, to make them better citizens. Campuses in the Renaissance are a little different. We have lots and lots of advanced hardware, lots of advanced software, screens all over the place. We have undergraduate life passionately connected to creativity. We have lots of gaming classes, lots of storytelling classes. Learning content is often gamified. And we have career paths in digital storytelling and in gaming. Interfaces are very different, where we often speak to them or we just touch them. 18-year-olds in the Renaissance world, they hate being told they've come through a Renaissance. Just don't want to talk about it right now. But for them, they identified with game characters growing up. And if you think that's crazy, think about how many of you identified with a movie character or a TV character. If you don't believe me, look at how many James Dean, Marilyn Monroe posters are still up there. Leading game developers are as well known as movie directors are now. I mean, not everybody knows them, but they're heroes that you look for to see their next project. And these 18-year-olds, most of their work in life is gamified. Now, I want you to think about this. We have the fall of the silos, where open has won. We have peak higher education, where higher education has lost. We have Tutor Me Siri, where we have AIs available on campus and in your pocket. And we have the Renaissance world, where we've gone through a boom time. And let me ask you, just a quick show of hands, which of these do you think is most likely to occur? Not what you want. So let me go through it, and you can put up your hand. First, fall of the silos. Do you think this is most likely to occur? Okay, bunch of curmudgeons, good. Peak higher education, what do you think? Hello there in the back, good, okay. Tutor Me Siri, how many of you see that? Whoa! Did you guys all just watch her and you're all like stuck with it? I was actually going to use a picture from HAL 9000 for that. You're glad I didn't. And how about the Renaissance? Okay. You guys are curmudgeons who love artificial intelligence. Okay, that tells me a lot. That tells me a lot. Now let me ask. That was a quantitative response? That's a qualitative response. Why? Those of you who picked the Renaissance, those of you who picked Tutor Me Siri, why? And don't say because everybody else did. Yes, and you have to say who you are, by the way. Who are you?
My name is Caroline Boyle from Adelphi University.
Hi.
I just actually had my 11-year-old give a speech last night why he doesn't need to go to school anymore. Oh, that's nice.
Wait, was this at home to you or was that at school?
He's on the debate club. Debating the use of cell phones in class or not. In 6th grade. So the fact is where this whole speech was on the fact that education is no longer going to be in the classroom. So
Very good, very good. Enjoy that kid. Debate club? He's going to rule us all, isn't he? Hi, and who are you first?
Yeah, I'm Jack Bowman from SPD, and I also the athletic department. I have a practice in clinical psychology, and I recently had a student come to me with the request of going on to home tutoring. And the reason that she requested that, even though she had no disability, was because she felt that she could learn better using artificial intelligence, tutoring online. When I contacted the school district, Villa Place School District, they told me that they have an alternate school program, which I had never heard of before. The students don't get taught. They go in the afternoon from 4 to 6, 4 days a week, where they take online courses, and there are aides or tutors there to help them learn the online content in order to graduate from high school. So I don't think it's a future development, it's already here.
So that's like the Math Emporium model?
Yes.
Where they have, and what level was that? That's high school level?
High school.
And the student was what age?
She was 15 years old.
Okay. Glimpse of the future. Well, the nice thing about, one of the ways of looking at the future is looking at things that are already happening in the present and studying them. Brilliant, thank you for that. How about the rest of you guys? Yeah, please.
My name is Matt Dueno. I have 3 boys, 14, 12, and 10.
Oh, good.
And I picked Renaissance because I already see that happening with them. They have iPads and they're downloading musical programs, GarageBand, for example, and they're writing their own music with GarageBand. They're doing all these educational online things. My oldest son is learning to play the guitar, and he's not taking any lessons or anything. He's going to YouTube, and there are all kinds of instructions on YouTube. You pick a song, and they'll tell you how to do it on YouTube.
Absolutely.
He's learning to play the guitar. He's writing music. He's into art. graphic arts, and so I think Renaissance is the way.
At 14, and 10 and 12. And who are you again?
Matthew Engel,
And you're at?
I work in information systems,
Excellent.
but I also adjunct all over. So.
Very good. Well, so you've got 10, 12, 14, 15-year-old, and your 11-year-old? So a glimpse of the future right here from all those kids. Excellent, excellent. What else did you pick? Yes, all the way in the back. Yes, you.
My name is Neil Halton. In regards to tutoring, I just had personal experience, so I used electronically transmit information to teach myself, statistical application, and I would have been lost without those resources. And in regards to the Renaissance, I've had this time described to me as being in the center of a hurricane vortex. And when we come out to the other side, that landscape will be something that we may not recognize.
Yes.
But the excitement is living in this time.
Yes.
And so we are really in a changing and exciting environment. Coupled with this, for me, is Lawrence Lessing and the Creative Commons movement.
Absolutely.
And so we have this open environment where we can repurpose, reuse, and to me that's extremely exciting.
Let me just bring that up. And where are you based? Are you here at
St. Joseph's College.
St. Joseph's? Excellent. So if you don't know the Creative Commons movement, this is actually a really unusual combination of legal and technological innovation. Remember when I said I could break any computer by looking at it? Here we go. And what Creative Commons lets you do is it lets you publish any digital object, all physical object as well, as far as I can tell. And instead of having copyright, you pick a different form of license. And the license could say, if I publish something under copyright, it says, you cannot use this at all unless you pay me money under the terms I choose for the next, what is it now, 78 years? I've lost track. It's a huge time. But I could publish under the terms of saying, you can use what I just published and do whatever the heck you want with it. Just cite me. That's all I want. Or do whatever you want, but don't make any money, and you don't have to cite me. Or various other licenses. These little CC licenses you'll find. And you'll find them on YouTube, you'll find them on blogs, you'll find them on images and so on. Thank you for mentioning that. And that's you're learning a statistical software? That's
It was YouTube that saved the day.
very good. Very good. Now, let me come back to this. Now that you're buzzing with the future, now that your minds are rippling with this, oh, I'm sorry, I missed you. You can ask me another question, because that was one. Who are you?
All of the silos
Yes.
seem awfully like, to me, like the promises of socialism and leading to animal farming. And I wonder if
Yes.
you could speak to that.
You are?
Oh, my name's John Kylie, I'm in the Department of
Excellent, excellent. And when I was asking about education,
we don't have school education.
Right.
It's on something called the Center for Science and Math.
oh, excellent.
Really exciting.
Excellent, terrific. That's a powerful, powerful current to find, because when you listen to people in the Creative Commons movement and the open movement, there's a ton of old lefty thinking in there. I mean, there's a lot of this will, and people don't say Marx and they don't say means of production, but they do say this is going to level differences, this is going to make things available, it's going to be, there's a lot of utopian hope to it, and often buried in it, but yes, there is a lot of that.
And then they forget that what that led to was not creativity, because humans want efficiency.
Right, and so that's one of the problems, and one of the reasons I presented that open scenario with challenges is that it depends on how it turns out. And so one of the reasons why we like silos is to avoid that contest. So one of the reasons, I mentioned the vertical stacks. One of the reasons why the iTunes App Store is so appealing is because it's so hard to get into. It's actually too hard to get into. They've forbid things that they shouldn't have forbidden before. But if you download something, it's probably going to be good. Whereas if you just download a random app from the web, it could be malware or whatever, so you want to pay for that. The recognition part is hard. And often we'd have to turn to Google for that, because Google is how we find recognition, right? Well, if you want to find something and determine if it's popular or not, Google's algorithm is, it works by the number of inbound links, so that often drives popularity. And YouTube, for example, is part of Google results now, as is the blogosphere, not Facebook. Those vertical stacks. So that's one of the ways that we have to eke out popularity. So now search engine optimization becomes a way that we try and become, and that can become very ugly, like Animal Farm. I mean, some websites are more equal than others, right? I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, you had your hand up before and I missed you. I'm sorry.
I just have a comment on that whole thing about the silos. I don't see them as leveling out because of all the economic foundations in those. And I really identified when you were saying that non-compatibility thing between the engines. I still get messed up in that, but I find myself getting incapacitated in the iWorld, okay? In the cloud, in the Mac, in the iPhone. And I'm like, if I'm messing my mind up here, there's no way that they're going to let go of the financial gains that they're getting from having those individual things. To me, that seems like that's already in place, and they will never let go of that financial benefit in my mind, although I've seen young people just cloud over all of it, you know, and succeed in learning. I just was a special ed teacher in public high school in New York City for 7 years, and I saw kids that had to fight for their right to use digital access in the classroom. I experienced being like an insubordinate because I wanted to give them that access. You know, that was the nature of my job, to give them access to any way that they could learn and graduate. Yet I was battled with it because I had such a passion for it. So I mean, I saw so many things like culture.
This is, you were mentioning the hurricane changing things. So here you are, you are in a system, and the promise of one part of the system makes you go against the other part. That's a wonderful, tell me your name again, I'm sorry. That's a great story to have. We're on the edge of time, and I have to, by law, show you the last slide. This is a thing. I don't know if you know this, that every presentation has to end with URLs. It's a federal statute. I don't know if you know that, but it's important to know. So everything I do, I throw on the web because I am one of these socialists who will be lined up against the wall and shot. Before then, though, you can find me. I tweet a lot. I blog more than is reasonable, and I do check email from time to time. Now, my wife and I are going to be here all day because we're fascinated by what you guys are doing. We're looking forward to the presentations today, and we hope to learn from you. And I would love to hear from you guys. How long until the next session? Right now? Okay, so you have half an hour. We'll be here to talk, and let me thank you all for your attention, and we'll see you on Twitter. Thank you.